Okay, so welcome everyone for today's discussion. Today we are going to talk about, just give me a second. Yeah. So today we are going to talk about infrastructure, infra as code, and we will use Ansible as our example, right? So we are going to talk about that. So let's first understand the problem, and then we are going to understand the solution. Okay. Are you guys able to see what I'm writing here? Is it zoomed enough for you? Can you guys understand? Cool. Okay. So we are going to talk about infrastructure as code using Ansible. Let's understand a problem. Okay. Let's say you join a team and you set up a few servers for them, right? Let's say you are in the infrastructure team, right, which is responsible for setting up servers, configuring them, and handing them over to the project teams and making regular system configurations so that the developers can, do their thing, right? So how do you do that? Let's say there is a team A, there's a team A, and this team likes to have, let's say, 5 VMs, right? 5 virtual machines. And let's say there are these 5 machines that they want, and you are creating these machines for them, right? Let's say this is an Ubuntu machine. This is also an Ubuntu. This is also an Ubuntu, and this is Windows, and this is Windows. So they want 3 Windows servers, sorry, 2 Windows servers and 3 Ubuntu servers, right? And then they come back and say, hey, we want a bit more customizations on these servers. So on Ubuntu number 1, we want Git installed. On this one, we want, let's say, Jenkins installed, right? And here we want, what do we want? Let's say we want Jira installed, right? So we want 3 machines with these configurations, and then some more configurations, right? For example, I want a user called Bob created here, a user called Alice created here, and on Jira only Charlie or Charles should be able to access this machine. So these users should be created and they should be granted access to these machines, right? And then there could be more configurations. For example, um, this should have port 22 open. This should have port 8080 open. This should have port, let's say 443 open. These are all server configurations, right? That the development team is looking for. And as an infrastructure provider, you would be working on getting them this. Similarly, there will be different configurations for Windows machines as well. So how would you get them this configuration, these machines? So you're going to, let's say you use AWS as a infrastructure provider. You can use on-premise, you can use VMware, whatever. I'm just taking an example of AWS. Or you can think of any example where you can create virtual machines. So you get these 3 virtual machines, right? And you set up these machines with the appropriate operating system. And then how do you make these configurations? Well, you log into machine number 1, right? You log into machine number 1 and do an apt install git, do a user add Bob, and then you log into machine number 2, you do apt install Jenkins or whatever you have to do, follow these steps to install Jenkins, install Java, and then do a user add Alice, right? And then on 3, you do the same thing for Jira, add this user, and then you do similar configurations on Windows and then hand them over to your team, right? They start using it, right? This is pretty straightforward. Now, there are two challenges with this approach of infrastructure configuration. The first challenge is that this is not a repeatable activity. This will be repeated multiple times. There are many teams which are going to come to you to have this configuration, but you cannot make it efficient by introducing repeatability. Whenever somebody comes with the same configuration request, you have to again do all these steps once more. You have to log into the machine, install Git, install create Bob, and then give it, right? So repeatability of this request is high, but the repeatability of your task is very low. You can't repeat it. And then you cannot, and then you say consistency, right? Let's say you handed over these three systems to team A, and they're logging in and doing their stuff, but by mistake, somebody deletes this user Bob. This user Bob is gone. Well, how do you get it back? Right? Then somebody has to log in again. Maybe you will log in as an admin permission or your teammate, and then get the Bob user back. But what is the configuration of the Bob user? How will you remember? Like what was the home directory? What was the shell configured for the Bob user? You will have to remember, right? So you will have to rely on some documentation or some tribal knowledge, which will get you back there. So consistency is also not achievable if you do it manually. And then there is error prone, right? You might make mistakes, right? You might deviate from the defined configuration when you are installing Jenkins. Maybe it was required that you install Jenkins version 1.x and then you install 2.x, right? It's a manual error. It's an acceptable, not acceptable, but it's an error which anybody can foresee that this could be made, right? So this is very error prone, and then it requires huge documentation. So there is inherently lack of documentation in this approach, right? You have to maintain a doc, like for a team, I have given 5 servers. These are the configurations so that somebody who is supporting them can look at the documentation and can make the changes whenever required, right? So this has a problem of this manual configuration. So what do we do? If that has a problem, what's the solution? So the solution is to not rely on human beings to make this configuration. Okay. So what you do is, let's say you want to configure 5 systems. So you have your 5 systems. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you get your 5 systems and you get your operating systems installed on them. So for example, you can have this as Ubuntu, right? These are Ubuntu machines. And this could be, these two are Windows machines, right? So let's say you got these systems and you want to do the same thing which we did here. You want to configure these systems as such and before you give them to the team A. So rather than doing it manually, right? The approach that we want to go with is to configure these systems programmatically. Okay, we configure this programmatically. So what does that mean? That means rather than logging into machines individually and managing the configuration, you write the configuration as code. Okay, you write the configuration code. Okay, so I want Git installed, I want Jenkins installed, I want user Bob created, I want user Alice created. All that comes here. Okay, all the comes here. So user creation, right? Packages installation, files, whatever you want to configure is all defined here. And then you take this configuration and then you feed it to a tool. we feed it to a tool, and this tool is called as a configuration management tool. Okay, so this is a configuration management tool. For example, okay, this is fine. Okay, for example, it could be Ansible. Right? Example, Ansible. So we will use this tool to um, manage the configuration. So we write this configuration code, which is understood by Ansible. So Ansible can understand what is written here. Okay, Ansible can understand what is written here, and then it takes this information and then applies this information to the systems that it has to manage. Right? So if it is managing these systems, it's going to apply them to all these systems. Right? And this is what Ansible generally does. So I'm going to show you today how this all works, right? How you can write a piece of code, feed it to Ansible, and then Ansible is going to make changes here, right? Now, before showing you that, let me take you through some basic concepts. Like this is the basic architecture. You will have a virtual machine, a VM on which this Ansible is installed. Okay, so this is a VM on which you install Ansible, and then you write your configuration code for Ansible in YAML. Right? In YAML, you write this configuration code. You feed it to Ansible, which is on some system. Now, how would Ansible know which machines to manage? Right? You can have 1,000 machines in your infrastructure. Which one should be managed by Ansible? So you also have another component called as an inventory. Okay, so you have something called as inventory, which is also written in YAML, but there are many ways. It is not written in YAML per se, but you can write it in YAML. But there are many ways you can write. But in this inventory, you define your hosts to manage. So host 1, host 2, host 3. These are the hosts that you want to manage. Okay, so maybe host 1, which is Windows. Sorry, Ubuntu, right? Host 2, which is Ubuntu. Host 3, which is Ubuntu. Or I would say Ubuntu 1, 2, 3, something like this. So you tell Ansible that my hosts are here. We want to manage them. Okay, that's what this inventory is about. Okay, so inventory contains the information about hosts which Ansible has to manage. And Ansible is going to read this inventory and apply configurations to the hosts which are part of this inventory. Okay. So you will say, hey, take this configuration code, feed it to Ansible. Ansible is going to read the inventory and apply all that code to the hosts which are part of that inventory. And that's all it does. So I'm going to show you how to write this inventory. I'm going to show you how to write this configuration code and how to set up an Ansible system and then feed it. Now, question is, okay, these hosts exist and Ansible setup is there, but how would this Ansible VM talk to these servers, talk to these hosts, which needs to be managed by Ansible? So the answer is it can depend on can consume a couple of protocols to talk to the remote systems. For example, the most popular protocol for talking to remote systems is SSH. I hope you know what is SSH, right? So via SSH, it can talk to those systems. Similarly here, let's say SSH, right? But for Windows, it does not work. SSH does not work. So it relies on another protocol called Windows Remote Machine Protocol. So it works with Windows RM. Okay, so it connects via that. Now to connect with SSH, we need to configure Ansible so that it has the correct authentication details of these machines, right? So in the inventory, we can also specify what is the username and password for these machines, right? So there could be different username and passwords for these different machines. Correct. So in the inventory, we can give this information, or we can have a passwordless, like maybe a private key or a public key that we can use to configure these machines. Okay. And that's about it. That's how Ansible would work, right? So let me quickly set it up. I'm going to take you through this entire setup. I have a AWS account with me, and I'm going to create some servers. Let's go to EC2. I'm going to create 3 servers. Okay, all of them Ubuntu, and T3 micro is fine. I would need a key pair, yes. Key pair. You don't need to know AWS for this. Right, so I'll call first machine as my Ansible control machine, which is the Ansible server. And let's call the second one as Ubuntu 1, right? And the third one as Ubuntu 2. Okay, right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to first configure my Ansible system. So what I want is I want a VM. I have got a VM, which is this one, and I'm going to configure it by installing Ansible. So let's connect to this VM. So I'm now connected to this VM, right? This is the Ansible control machine. I'll say sudo, I'll become sudo. Hopefully you guys can see. Right. So you guys can see this terminal, right? Okay, I just zoomed in a bit. So yeah. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to say, well, we want to install Ansible. But there is no other way I can increase the size rather than just doing it. Hopefully this one is okay. So let's say Ansible install on Windows. Sorry, not Windows, Ubuntu. Right, so these are the commands that I need to run. I'm going to quickly run these commands. And then I have to run these two commands. Done. Let's do this. And finally, this. Done. Right? So Ansible is installed. If I say Ansible dash dash version, you will see that Ansible is installed. It is version 2.20.2, and a lot of Python things are also installed. So Ansible is written in Python. It installs Python and all the dependencies. That's why it takes some time. Okay, Ansible is installed. I can see some output when I run this command. Cool. That work is done. So hold on a sec. Where did it go? Right. So Ansible installation is done. Okay. Now we have to define our inventory of these machines. So right now we have only two machines, two hosts, right? See, this is the problem with this zooming in. Okay, so we have Ubuntu 1 and Ubuntu 2 machines, two machines um, which we want to manage, right? So let me connect to those machines. Let's open them in new tab. This is Ubuntu 2, right? So let's connect to it. This is Ubuntu 1 and Ubuntu 2, right? So now on Ubuntu 2, we don't have to do much rather than just configure it with Ansible. Okay. So on Ansible, I'm going to create a file called /etc slash inventory. Let's say slash etc slash Ansible hosts. Okay, so I'm going to create this file. This file is already created or installed when you install Ansible. I'm going to modify this further. Okay, and this has some examples. So again, zooming in that much, I think is causing a challenge. Right, so you see here, these are the, come on. Okay, so this is the file which exists, and there are a lot of examples on how you can write an inventory, but it is all commented right now. Okay, so let's, come on. Let me reset the zoom and see. Behavior is weird. Okay, so now it's a bit better. Right, so I'm going to write my inventory file here. Okay, and I will say host one, and I say the host one name is Ansible. The host one is the name of the first host. What is the address of the host? The address of the host is this IP address for us, right? This is the address of the host. We'll copy it and paste it, and then say, what is the username to connect to this host? So I know that when I set up a machine on AWS, the username is Ubuntu. Similarly, I'm going to create another host. I'll just copy this and paste it. And the host 2, the second Ubuntu host that we want to manage is this one. That's the IP address of the second host, and we will call it as 2. Right? So I have created a simple inventory. Let's print it. etc Ansible hosts. And it only has these 2 entries. Rest everything is commented. You can see the pound sign in front of the line. That means it's a comment. So nothing will be considered. So you see this host 1 and host 2. These are the 2 hosts that we want to manage. What is host 1? Host 1 is this host at this IP address. And when Ansible will connect to this IP address or this host, it's going to use the username Ubuntu. Same goes for host 2. And these are these 2 machines, right? So that's how our Ansible is ready. So our inventory is done, right? So our inventory is created. Our Ansible is configured, okay? But we still need to connect these via SSH. So we have not given the password for the SSH, right? So how will Ansible machine connect to these instances? Via a password or a private key, okay? So we want to use the private key. So what I'm going to do is, when I created this host on AWS, we create the key pair to connect to these hosts. So when you have your host in your company or in your school or wherever you are, or college or wherever you are doing your practices, you will get credentials to connect to these machines. You will have a username and a password to connect to these machines, right? Here on AWS, we can create a machine with a username password, but by default, you get a private key to connect. And that private key is downloaded when you connect it. Okay, so this is a private key that was downloaded. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give this private key to this particular Ansible machine so that it can use the private key to SSH into these machines. Okay, anybody who has a private key can connect to these machines. That's how AWS works. So I will give that private key to this Ubuntu system. What I'm going to do is I will say Vim, I'll just use nano, nano SSH ID underscore RSA, right? And what I'm going to do is I will just copy the contents of this machine, of this key. I'll open it in Notepad. So you might not be able to see this. But what I'm doing is I just copied that and paste it here. Okay, so this is the private key that I have pasted and save. If I print this file, you will see that it has a private key. Okay, and also this private key should have very restrictive permissions. So there you go. This is the private key. It could be 6, right? It should be 6. Right. Okay. So now Ansible has all the information. First is that Ansible knows uh, about the inventory because we updated the file with the host information and password information and everything. Then Ansible knows about these two machines via the inventory. And Ansible also got a SSH private key, right? SSH private key. It has also got from us. So that is also in the system, which it is going to use. Okay, it's going to use this SSH private key for connecting to these systems. Okay, now let's try something out. Let's run one command on Ansible machine, which is Ansible all -n ping. Now, this is a command which you don't need to know right now, but this command is going to try to, from Ansible, it's going to try to connect to all the hosts and then tell us if it is able to reach the host. So it says host key verification failed. Okay, so this is an error which comes when you are trying to connect to an unknown host. Okay, so when you first time do SSH to any host, you get this, right? SSH RSA key, do you want to connect? And then you have to say yes, and then it connects, right? So by default, that is the behavior. So it's saying host key verification is failed. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to also, let's say, just give me a second. Yes, I'm going to do this. Just give me a second. It's not a conclusive answer here. Okay, so we can set this variable as well. Right, so let's do this. Export. Now let's see. Right, so it works now. Right? So we set this variable where we say, hey, don't check the host key via SSH. So Ansible will consider this variable and then change its behavior. So now when we run this command, Ansible all dash ping, it says it is able to connect to host one. If you can see here, maybe I'll zoom in a bit. Right, so it is able to connect to host one and the connection was successful. And it is able to connect to host two, connection was successful. So that means SSH connectivity is working between Ansible and the target host. Are you guys with me till now? Hopefully you are able to follow me. Yeah, cool. So now we are here. We have Ansible VM, we have inventory, and we are able to connect to the Ubuntu host. Now let's write some YAML code to, let's say, I'm going to write a code to install a package, right? Let's take an example of a package. So this is the Ubuntu 2 machine. Let's run a command called finger. Okay. And if I run the command called finger, it says command not found, but it can be installed. It's a package available. Similarly, it's not also not installed on Ubuntu 1 as well. Now let's say my customers, my users, they want this package installed, right? So how can I install it for them? Now we have the machines and Ansible is all set up. We come back here to the main problem, which was this, right? Yeah, the users want configuration. We want to give them the configuration, but we don't want to do that manually. Okay, we want to write the code and then give this configuration. Right. So for that, we write something called as a playbook. This code, this piece of configuration is known as a playbook. Okay. And this playbook contains code for all the configurations that you want to manage on your host. So let me show you a quick playbook. Example playbook. The playbook name can be anything, but it has to be a YAML file. So it will end in YML. And yeah, this is not good. So Vim is not working. Let's do a nano. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'll say, right, name of this play is manage Ubuntu systems. Okay. And in this playbook, I'm going to write some code, right? I'm going to write some code. So the name of the playbook is manage Ubuntu systems. And here I will write some codes, which is specified in tasks. Okay. Now the playbook is in YAML and it has a defined structure and Ansible expects specific keywords as part of your playbook. If you want to see the complete documentation, you can see here. Let's say Ansible playbook. Here we go, Playbook syntax, right? So it expects you to have a name, host, then a remote user, then tasks. These are the main things. Okay, remote user is also not main thing. Name, host, and tasks. And in the tasks, you specify what configuration you want. Okay, so let's first write some tasks. And the only task is I want to manage the package called Finger. I want to make sure that both Ubuntu 1 and Ubuntu have Finger installed. Okay, so I'm going to write a task. The name of the task is install or manage Finger package. And for this task, I'm going to use a special module called apt. So I'll come back to the modules uh, apt, and I'll say name is Finger. Right? This. So I am writing this code. The playbook name is manage Ubuntu systems, and it has one task to manage a Finger package. And for that, it uses a module. Now, what is a module? Modules are nothing but small binaries. Modules are nothing but small binaries which are installed along with Ansible on the systems. Right? So these are all modules. And these modules, these binaries, what do? They allow you to perform certain configurations on the host. So there would be one module for installing packages, one module for managing users, one module for managing services, one module for managing your databases, one module for managing your files. Okay, so these are the small programs which allow you to do that. These are called modules. So I say I want to use app module, and these are the parameters to the module. So what do I want app module to do? I want app module to make sure that this app package Finger is in present state. Okay, and then I have many hosts. So on what host I want to run this playbook? So I can say host, and then I can mark as I only want this for host 1, or I only want this for host 2, or I want it for all my hosts. Right? So in the host, I can provide some values. There are various ways, various expressions with which you can provide some values. But here I'm just saying, just let all my hosts get this playbook. Okay. And I'm going to save this playbook. Okay, the zooming in on this is terrible, but I can print this playbook and it looks something like this. Pretty straightforward. Right? Now, how do we run this playbook? Ansible dash playbook and example playbook.yaml. That's how I can run the playbook. Okay. Now, one more thing which I have missed here is in the app package, I also wanted to run app update. Okay. So there is another parameter called update cache. I think so. Yeah, update cache. Right. So when I say this, app before installing the package will also try to say run apt get update so that it can get the latest list of packages. Okay, so true. I say apt cache update cache true. This is our playbook. Now let's say Ansible playbook and give the playbook to the Ansible tool and run this. Okay, it seems to be running for a long time. Okay. There is one more challenge with this. Maybe let me stop it. See, the thing is, let's not manage a package. Okay, I'm going to manage something else here. Right. So instead of a package, let's first start with a manage something else. Okay. So instead of that, let's say I manage a file. I'll come back to package. First, let me show you something working. Let's say I want to manage a file. Manage a file. Okay. And let's say file name is, well, for that we have a, or let's say manage a directory. Okay. And for that, we will use a module called file. And we will say name is equal to dir by Ansible. And state is directory. Okay. It should be path and slash tmp slash dir by Ansible. Right. So this is what I'm doing. I say, this is my playbook, run it on all hosts. And in the task, I want to manage a directory. So there's a module called file. And in the file module, I specify that this is the path which I want to manage and make sure that the state is the directory. So this file exists as a directory. Okay. I save it. So this is it now, right? Now let's run the playbook. And this worked, right? If you see the output, the output is host 1 and host 2, and something has changed. So if I go to host 2 and look at /tmp directory, you will see a dir by Ansible is exists. So this directory is created, and it is also created here, dir by Ansible. Okay, so this is done. Let's go back to example playbook. Now the problem with the app module was that app module requires sudo, right? It requires sudo permissions because it's a privileged activity. Installing a package is privileged activity. So I would say another parameter to this task is become true. Like become sudo and then run this command or run this module. Creating the directory was not a privileged task because it is creating in /tmp path, which does not require elevation. But here installing a package requires elevation. Okay, so I'm going to save this and I run the playbook. All right, now you see it is proceeding. It says changed on host 1 and host 2. Manager directory said, okay, it did not say change. It is saying, okay, because there is no change required. It is already in the correct state. So now if I go to Ubuntu 2 machine and if I run the command finger, I get some output. Okay. And here, if I run the command finger, I get some output. So this is what I wanted to show you, a brief overview on how Ansible works and what's the overall workflow. Now, there are so many other things that we have overlooked, right? How do we write playbooks? How do we write advanced playbooks, variables, conditionals, and different kind of modules? How do we dynamically get the inventory? Right? When we don't want to manage it statically, how do we get a dynamic inventory and all that stuff? So, yeah. Do we need to write separate playbooks for each host having different configurations? So you should write a playbook for one use case. Let's say you want to set up a Jenkins and then multiple Jenkins hosts or Jenkins build machines. There should be one playbook, and there you can specify like, okay, install these tools on main Jenkins machine, install these binaries on the Jenkins build machines, and then connect them, configure that. So based on the use case, you should define a playbook, one playbook for one use case, rather than one playbook for each host. Okay. Right. So unfortunately, we do not have much time. I have to go to my next meeting. Uh, okay, there's a question. Can we configure Ansible hosts like only apply changes to host 1 and 2, but not 3? Yeah, you can define so many ways, right? So let's say host. mm, so you can specify like this, hosts, okay? All hosts, one host, or multiple hosts like this, and then all hosts except one host, something like this. You can say all and then colon and then one exclamation mark and say host 3. So everything except host 3. Right? So you can do like that. I'm not sure. I think I will check with SkillUpRight to understand if there could be more sessions. But definitely we will plan, and you guys will be updated on that whenever we have. Okay. Thank you guys for your time today. And I'll meet you some other time. Okay. I know there are so many questions, but trust me, I would have loved to spend more time. I really have to go. I hope I was able to give a brief overview on the technology as such. And when we meet next time, I'm going to answer all your questions. Yeah. Thank you and take care. Bye bye.